The year is 793, on a small island off the coast of Northumbria, a place so isolated the world has almost forgotten it exists. A monk named Cuthbert wakes before dawn. He's done this every morning for 40 years. The same prayers, the same cold stone under his knees, the same bells echoing through the halls, just like they have since before he was born. But today, something feels different. The birds aren't singing. He walks to the window of Lindisfarne Abbey, and in the grey preed, on light he sees them, long narrow ships sliding through the mist like wolves hunting their prey. Their sails are slashed with red and black. Their carved prows look like snarling beasts. The Vikings have arrived, and what they're about to do won't just stain history with blood and ash. It will reshape the future of England, the Church, and the entire medieval world. But here's what the history books leave out. The violence wasn't the worst part. What came after? The calculated cruelty, the erasing of everything sacred, the way they turned holy men into trophies and sacred spaces into stages for humiliation. That's what shattered the soul of Christian England. The real question isn't how much darkness you can stomach. It's whether you're ready to witness the moment where humanity cracked, where mercy died, and where an entire civilization's voice was smothered forever. If you're drawn to the pieces of history schools won't touch, the terrified letters monks wrote, the Viking sagas bragging about their raids, the archaeological finds just now coming to light, then liking and subscribing helps us uncover more of these buried truths. Now, back to that morning, because the bells have fallen silent. To understand what happened at Lindisfarne, you need to understand what it was. This wasn't just a monastery. It was the beating heart of Christian England. Founded in 635 by St. Aidan, Lindisfarne was where the faith took root in the north. Kings came here to pray. Monks created manuscripts so beautiful they looked heaven-touched. The Lindisfarne Gospels, still preserved today, were made here. Pages covered in gold leaf and deep blue lapis lazuli. Prayers written in Latin and Old English. Artwork so precise it felt like the monks were carving their devotion into eternity. This was a place built on peace. The monks had no weapons, they had no walls. The island itself was their shield, cut off from the mainland by the tide twice a day. They believed God would protect them, and for 158 years he did. Brother Cuthbert, standing at the window watching the ships drift closer, had never seen violence. None of them had. The youngest monks, boys sent here at 12 or 13, knew only the rhythm of prayer bells, midnight matins, dawn lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline, hours that divided their lives into pieces of devotion. They woke in darkness, copied scripture by candlelight, ate in silence, slept on stone, and they believed, truly believed, that their suffering and discipline made them untouchable, that holiness was armor. But on June 8, 793, the Viking longships landed on Holy Island, and the men who stepped off them weren't soldiers. They were raiders, farmers and fishermen who spent winters fighting over frozen soil and summers searching for softer targets. They'd heard rumors whispered through Norse ports, tales from merchants who visited England's coast, stories of a place where silver lay unguarded, where men prayed instead of fought, where weakness was mistaken for holiness. To the Vikings, Lindisfarne wasn't sacred. It was a treasure chest with a cross on top, and the monks inside, they were obstacles, or toys. Cuthbert watches the ships hit shore. He counts them, 8, maybe 9. The mist hides the rest. He sees men leap into the shallow water, axes ready, moving fast. He should run, warn the others, but he can't move, because deep inside a thought rises, one he'll carry to his grave. God isn't going to stop this. If this moment doesn't shake something inside you, unarmed men in prayer about to face death, then maybe we've forgotten what our ancestors fought to keep. That civilization hangs by a thread, that brutality needs no reason, that everything sacred can vanish in a single morning, and what followed was somehow even darker. Stay with me, because what happened next was worse than the attack itself. The monks hear them before they see them, voices shouting, not Latin, not English, a language that sounds like gravel scraping ice, like something dragged up from the ocean floor. Cuthbert finally runs, sandals slapping stone, shouting for the others to wake. 70 men leave here, most are old. Some are boys not even 14, sent by noble families to learn scripture. They gather in the chapel. The abbot, a man named Higbald, tells them to pray, to trust God. Maybe the strangers are travelers, merchants, lost sailors. But when the doors burst open, the men who step inside are not lost. And the first thing the Vikings do isn't kill. They laugh. Because the scene looks ridiculous to them. Old men in robes, young men holding books like shields, an abbot standing at the altar with a crucifix raised high, speaking a language they don't understand. One Viking, his name lost to history, though sagas describe men like him, walks up to Higbald, calm, almost curious. He glances at the silver chalice on the altar, the gold reliquary holding St. Cuthbert's bones, the jeweled cross that has hung there for generations. And he takes them, not violently, not with anger, just takes them like picking fruit from a tree. When Higbald tries to stop him, the Viking slaps him across the face with the flat of his axe. Higbald falls. Blood spills across the altar, the stone floor, the white robes of monks who rush to him and freeze. Then the violence erupts. Younger brothers try to run. Vikings yank them back by their robes, throw them to the ground. One raider grabs a manuscript from the scriptorium, a Gospel of Matthew that took 3 years to make, and rips the pages out, not for value, not for need, just to watch the horror on the monk's face. Cuthbert drops to his knees, whispering the Lord's Prayer, voice shaking. A Viking stands over him, axe raised. For a moment it seems he'll strike, but he doesn't. He laughs, spits, and walks away. Because killing Cuthbert would be mercy, and mercy isn't why they came. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written by monks who survived other raids, describes Lindisfarne like this in that same year. Terrible signs appeared over Northumbria, terrifying everyone who lived there. Strange flashes of lightning ripped through the sky, and people claimed they saw fiery dragons flying overhead. A great famine hit soon after these omens. And not long after that, on June 8th, the heathens swept through God's church at Lindisfarne, destroying it with rape and slaughter repeated like a curse. A letter from Alcuin of York, a scholar in Charlemagne's court, gives even more detail. He wrote to the Bishop of Lindisfarne, saying, "Never before has such terror struck Britain as what we have suffered from a pagan people. The church of St. Cuthbert is stained with the blood of God's priests and stripped of all its treasures. A place more sacred than any in Britain has been handed over to pagans as prey. Blood spattered everywhere. The monks who didn't escape were stripped, not just of their robes, but of their dignity. Vikings dragged them outside and forced them to watch as the abbey was torn apart. Manuscripts thrown into mud, pages that took months to illuminate ruined in seconds, chalices melted down for silver, relics and saints' bones once carried by pilgrims tossed aside like trash. One Viking stumbled into the library, shelves full of books. He didn't know what they were, couldn't read, didn't care. He swept his arm across the shelves just to watch them crash, hundreds of hours of work, generations of knowledge gone instantly. Another found the wine cellar and the communion wine. He drank straight from the barrel, then smashed it. Red wine flooded the floor, mixing with blood already soaking the stone. Some monks were drowned in the shallow tidal pools surrounding Lindisfarne, held underwater until their prayers turned into bubbles. Others were taken as slaves, chained, marched to the ships, mostly the young and strong who could still work. And some, this part confirmed by archaeology, were displayed like props, bodies propped against the church walls, positioned as if kneeling in prayer. A mockery, a message. The Vikings pulled the golden cross from above the altar, and one raider hung it around his neck. Then he walked outside, stood in front of the surviving monks, and stretched out his arms like Christ on the cross. The rest roared with laughter. They weren't just stealing, they were performing. Brother Cuthbert saw all of this. He was still alive, still on his knees, but something inside him cracked. Not his body, his faith. The idea that the world could allow such evil, that God could watch it, that men could do this to other men and feel nothing, worse than nothing. Joy. The entire raid lasted 4 hours. By midday it was done. The Vikings loaded their ships with gold, silver, anything they could carry. They took 12 monks as slaves. They left 37 corpses behind, and when their ships vanished back into the mist, Lindisfarne fell silent. No bells, no prayers, just smoke and the tide dragging bodies out to sea. And here's what turns tragedy into nightmare. The Vikings came back, not once, not twice. For the next 70 years, Lindisfarne and other monasteries, Jarrow, Monkwearmouth, Ayn, were hit again and again because the Vikings realized something. Monasteries don't fight back, and monks can be ransomed. Cuthbert survived the first raid barely. He helped bury the bodies, 37 graves dug into rocky island soil. He watched Abbot Higbald, face still bruised from the axe blow, try to rebuild, try to understand. But 3 years later, the Vikings returned. This time, they knew exactly what they wanted. They didn't waste time smashing manuscripts or drinking wine. They went straight for the monks, the young ones, the healthy ones. Cuthbert was 39 now, still strong enough to be useful. They chained him with 11 others and marched them to the ships. 9th century records describe a system, a business. Vikings captured monks, took them to Scandinavia or Ireland, and sent messages back to England. Pay us or we kill them. Sometimes the church paid, sometimes it didn't. When it didn't, the monks were sold as slaves. Cuthbert was shoved into the belly of a longship. No light, no air, just the rhythm of oars and the stench of sweat, salt, and vomit. They crossed the North Sea in darkness, 3 days, maybe 4. He lost count. In Norway, he was sold to a farmer who needed hands for harvest. Cuthbert, who had spent his entire life copying scripture, now pulled weeds from frozen dirt. His fingers, once trained for quills, split open and bled in the cold. He tried to pray, but the words felt empty. Many enslaved monks were forced to row Viking ships, work Scandinavian farms. Some converted. Some died. Some simply vanished from history. Cuthbert died 3 years after his capture, far from home, buried in an unmarked field. No name, no grave, just another forgotten captive in a land that didn't know what monks were and didn't care. But the story gets darker. In 2017, archaeologists excavating a mass grave in Dorset, England, found the remains of 54 young men, all decapitated, all buried in the late 700s or early 800s. Testing on their teeth showed they weren't locals. They were Scandinavian. At first, researchers thought they were slain Viking raiders. Finally, some evidence that England fought back. But then they discovered something else. One skeleton was buried with a small wooden cross, roughly carved by hand. Another had marks on the spine, damage you only get from a lifetime spent bent over copying manuscripts. That curvature doesn't happen by accident. These weren't Viking warriors. These were Viking-held monks, captives who had been enslaved, taken to Scandinavia, and later brought back to England. Maybe as translators, maybe as ransom hostages, maybe simply because Vikings were moving and the monks were part of the cargo, and when they were no longer useful, when payment didn't come or work was done, they were executed. All 54 lined up, beheaded, dumped into a pit. The archaeological report noted something chilling. The cuts on their neck bones were clean and professional, done by someone who killed for a living. This wasn't rage, this wasn't battle, this was business. And now you've learned something most textbooks won't tell you. Viking raids weren't just acts of violence. They were an industry. Monasteries became hunting grounds. Monks became trade goods, assets on a ledger, human currency. If that doesn't make you want to remember their names, if knowing some of them died in foreign lands, praying in a language their captors mocked, doesn't make you want to subscribe and keep their stories alive, then maybe we've forgotten the lesson history is supposed to teach. That cruelty doesn't need hatred, it only needs opportunity, and the most terrifying kind of violence isn't fueled by passion, it's fueled by profit. After Lindisfarne, everything changed. The monasteries that survived started building walls, high stone walls that silently said, "We're done asking God to do the work we should have done ourselves." They hired guards, men with swords who stood watch while monks prayed. The irony was obvious. Places built for peace now protected by violence. Treasures were moved inland. The famous Book of Kells, one of the most beautiful illuminated manuscripts ever made, was created in Scotland, but moved to Ireland specifically to keep it out of Viking hands. Monks carried it themselves, traveling at night, hiding it in caves whenever they heard rumors of longships nearby. The monks stopped being just monks. They became fortress builders, negotiators, spies. They learned Norse, studied Viking tactics, built networks of lookouts along the coast who would light signal fires the moment raiders appeared. Prayer wasn't enough anymore. You had to be useful, strategic, armed. And England turned into a war machine. King Alfred the Great, ruling about a century after Lindisfarne, built a system of fortified towns called burhs, 33 of them, placed so no one in his kingdom was more than 20 miles from safety. He created a navy, reorganized the army, set up a draft, and taxed his people to pay for walls and weapons, all because of what happened on June 8, 793. By the time the Vikings were finally pushed back in the 11th century, England was different. Harder, colder, more suspicious of anyone from outside. Churches had guards. Monasteries looked more like castles. Trust became a luxury no one could afford. The age of undefended holiness was over. Lindisfarne Abbey was eventually rebuilt. But the monks who came back walked through halls that still smelled faintly of smoke. They prayed in a chapel where bloodstains had soaked deep into stone, and every gust of wind from the sea sounded like ships returning. Some monks refused to ever go back. The trauma was too much. One monk, writing in 820, said he couldn't sleep near windows anymore, that just seeing the ocean made him throw up, that he heard his brothers screaming in his dreams and woke up praying in a language he didn't remember learning. And then there's the strangest twist of all. The Vikings eventually converted. By the 10th century, Scandinavian kings were being baptized. See, Knut the Great, a Viking who conquered England, became one of its most actively Christian kings. Viking settlements in England adopted the faith, built churches, funded monasteries. The raiders became rulers. The destroyers of churches turned into their sponsors. Some of the men who burned Lindisfarne had grandsons who prayed there. But the scar stayed. A 12th century monk named Simon of Durham wrote, "The sorrow of that day still lives in the hearts of those who remember. For the heathens poured out the blood of saints around the altar and trampled the bodies of saints in the house of God, like dung in the streets, like dung in the streets." That's how the survivors remembered it, not as a heroic battle, but as a violation, as the moment the world revealed itself to be far crueler than they'd ever been taught, when faith didn't work as armor, when holiness didn't function as protection, when they learned that the only thing more dangerous than evil is assuming evil will never come for you. So why does Lindisfarne matter today? Because it reminds us that civilization is not guaranteed, that the things we think are untouchable, schools, libraries, places of worship, can be wiped out in a single morning by people who see them differently. The monks of Lindisfarne believed their holiness would shield them, that their books, prayers, and peaceful lives made them safe from the chaos beyond their shores. They were wrong, and the lesson isn't that faith is pointless. It's that faith without preparation is exposure. Before he was taken, before he died in that Norwegian field, Brother Cuthbert wrote one letter that survived. It was found in the 19th century in a monastery in York, written 3 months after the first raid, addressed to no one in particular. He wrote, "I do not know if God has abandoned us or if we have abandoned him. I do not know if our prayers were too weak or if the world is simply stronger than we believed. I know only that I watched men laugh while they killed, and that laughter, more than the blood, more than the screams, is what I cannot forget. That men could find joy in our suffering means the world is not what we were taught, and I do not know how to live in a world like that." 3 years later, he was in chains. Alcuin of York, the scholar who had written to the Bishop of Lindisfarne, said this, "Consider carefully, brothers, and examine diligently, lest perhaps this strange and unheard of evil was earned by some strange and unheard of sin. He was trying to explain the unexplainable, trying to force reason onto massacre, trying to believe suffering must have a purpose. But maybe the meaning is simpler. The world does not care what you consider sacred. It only cares what you can protect. You've just looked directly at one of history's darkest truths, a moment when peace was mistaken for weakness, and weakness became an invitation to violence. If stories like this make you realize how fragile humanity really is, how quickly the light can be snuffed out by people who refuse to see it, then subscribe to my channel and help keep these voices from disappearing again. Because some voices deserve to be heard, especially the ones that were silenced centuries ago. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, but only because someone chose to stand in the way.